Hello and welcome to Africa Here and Now, the conversation you've always wanted to have about the continent. I'm Martine Dennis. This episode is sponsored by African Business. Today, the question we're asking is, what lies ahead for Africa now the US and much of the West has cut aid? Is it an unmitigated disaster, or are there opportunities to be had? Joining me is the writer and broadcaster Donu Kogbra. She's in Abuja, the Nigerian capital, and Patrick Smith, editor of Africa Confidential, who's in Kenya, in the capital there, Nairobi. And our guest is a man who's well used to grappling with big questions. He's the marketing guru, Thebe Ikalafeng. Thebe's in Joburg. Thebe, I'm calling you a marketing guru.
I've been called worse.
What does a marketer do, let alone a guru? What does a marketing expert do?
Well, it helps to shape and tell stories that present a good image of anything. So we build reputations. We build brands and reputations. That's what marketers do.
Can you destroy a reputation if you need to?
Of course you can as well. Go to America and ask them how it's done. They're running a masterclass right now.
So as we talk, we are still reeling, aren't we, from the controversy, and that's putting it mildly, I guess, of the South African ambassador having been given his marching orders to leave the United States, obviously indicating how poor the relationship is now between the United States and South Africa. My question would be to you, Thebe, is do you think South Africa can actually withstand that, the appalling relationship? Can they afford to lose all of the United States and its assistance?
I think we are operating and living in a multipolar and multilateral world. And in that world, we have to maintain good relationships with different parties, some of whom we agree with and some of whom we don't disagree with. But most importantly, we have to understand where our national interests are and where our regional interests are. And in particular to those, we need to ask ourselves the question, what type of relationships we want to have with them. Can we afford to have a bad relationship with the United States? Not necessarily. I mean, America is the third largest investor in South Africa, particularly. China being first, EU being second as a unit, and America. But both America has always been part of Africa's development for many years. So I don't think necessarily we can afford to have a bad relationship with them. But can we afford to explain ourselves better? Of course, we need to explain ourselves better. And do we need to kowtow to the United States of America? Not necessarily, because we also are a country with its own national interests, and so is America. But if you are going to be an ambassador in somebody's country, one has to understand that you're a guest at the end of the day. And a guest doesn't come to anybody's country and start telling them off. And I think in this instance with South Africa, that's pretty much what happened in a way, that we are a guest in the United States of America as in an ambassadorial role. And in that space, particularly if you're a diplomat, you have to understand the balance between your personal views, the national views, but most importantly, the relationship, the national interest of the country you are in, and how to balance those two. And there are different ways as well to communicate the different interests in the different countries, particularly when you are in disagreement.
Because the relationship was already on the rocks, wasn't it, anyway? And we knew that US aid was pretty much going to be slashed completely. People are going to die as a consequence of this in the short term, aren't they?
Well, South Africa-US relationship has been challenged over the last few years. Because now remember, you also had Brigati in South Africa, the previous ambassador, the American ambassador. The recent one was in South Africa. And in that moment, you could begin to tell that our relationship is fraying in many ways, particularly because in the global world we live in and the multipolar world we live in, there's contestations between countries. You have a country like China, which is trying to assert itself in Africa, but America, which historically has been strong in America and South Africa. So our relationships have always been challenged over the last few years. So yes, of course, by now, when the aid is being cut, which of course is going to have some catastrophic impact on other people, particularly in the life area, then there's also another way to look at it. Aid in South Africa is only 0.1% of the GDP. compared to a country like Malawi, where it is about 30 to 40% of the GDP. So can South Africa recover without the aid money? I think if South Africa does its finances properly and talks to and brings in other partners, it can recover. But I don't think South Africa should be looking at it that way. We should not be looking at it of whether we can or cannot recover. We should be looking at it that we're a country with value, and America is a country with value. And in the world that we should be operating in, we should be exchanging mutual values. So we cannot afford to have enemies, if you will, because we're going to need them.
Hi, Thebe. Yeah, that was a really interesting point. The real money, of course, is in the trade between South Africa and the US, particularly the prospect of South Africa getting kicked out of the African Growth and Opportunity membership, which would mean a loss of tariff-free access to the US market, I think, for cars and also for citrus fruits, which is pretty substantial. Do you have any ideas, as a marketing guru, how South Africa could stop that? What can it offer the US to say, behind the closed doors, most of all, there's the slightly bigger, the much bigger picture, South Africa's macro relationship with the rest of the continent, that, it's the one country you can come to and use as a base for your relations with Angola, from Mozambique, Nigeria, you name it. South Africa historically has played that role. Is there something South Africa can sell to the US to stop the trade crisis?
But South Africa is the biggest economy in the continent, the most diverse, most industrialized, and offering a very diverse portfolio of goods and services. So to start with, South Africa is a very valuable partner in the world, a trading partner, not just for America, but for many other places, providing other minerals, up to 80% of the world's minerals in other minerals, which are valuable in the world. So I think as a value, we are a valuable country to start. But the second thing is, it's not just a South African thing, it's a Pan-African thing, that we have failed to be able to use the leverage of our resources better in the world, the leverage of our resources, our talent, and what we can in negotiations. We've always, as a continent, presented ourselves in a way as if we are being done a favor, rather than understanding that we actually have value to exchange with the rest of the world. So I don't think South Africa, of course, I think to resolve the diplomatic challenges, I do think that South Africa, of course, should be using, as they are right now, using back, because as you notice, as a country, we have not participated in the public space. We have not participated in whether it is the disagreements with Rwanda, whether it's the disagreement with America. We are a bit more sophisticated as a country, that we are not out there in the streets throwing mud at each other. So we've allowed anybody to express themselves how they feel, and South Africa is using the correct diplomatic back channels to deal with it. But I think in doing so, it should not be an approach of a beggar, but it should be an approach of somebody, a country which has got something of value.
I never cease to marvel at how some countries, including the UK, are panicking at the prospect of a rift being created between them and America. I mean, I love the Canadian response, which is defiant. I think the Chinese are also quite bolshy. But I think the thing
literally.
is... Exactly, literally. I think you're very right when you say you have to see yourself as something of value. You're adding value in your own right. You're not some supplicant going with a begging bowl and they're doing you a huge favor. I actually think that the world could do perfectly well without America. Even I can do without my Netflix movies, That's what I mean.
There's only because of Nigerian movies which are doing very well.
Yeah. Viva Nollywood.
So I agree with you. We've got to have the self-esteem to feel that we have as much to offer as we have to gain.
This episode is sponsored by African Business Magazine. The latest issue explores the impact of escalating trade wars on Africa and AI ahead of the Global AI Summit in Kigali this April. African Business delivers critical, unbiased analysis on the continent's business and political landscape. It gets the views of key industry leaders and influential decision makers. African Business has recently launched a new app, and the first 1,000 subscribers will get 4 months free. So don't miss out. Search for African Business in your app store. Thebe, you're in the business of branding particularly. There are, as you've already pointed out, there's a good list, isn't there, of homegrown African brands. What do they need to do, as well as all the others? What do they need to do in order to sell themselves better? Because if we're going to achieve more trade because there's no aid, these brands have really got to step up, haven't they?
Well, if in our Brand Africa study of the last 15 years, we've established that only 20% of the brands that Africans admire are made in Africa. In other words, we've got an 80% opportunity to improve our standing in the world and to improve our leverage in the world. So what is AfCFTA trying to do? AfCFTA is trying to open up the borders between the continent to try and create a $3.5 to $4 trillion economy across 1.3 billion Africans. So what we need to learn what the Chinese have done. What have the Chinese done? The Chinese have strengthened their borders and have defined the rules of how to play in their borders, and they have prioritized their made in China brands. And if you recall, in 2015, they enacted a Buy China, Buy Chinese Act, and particularly in the electronic space. And what has it done? Within less than 10 years, they had established very formidable and successful Chinese electronics brands. And that shows that for the continent as well, if we play by the same rules that everybody else does, including America, including China, and all those, if we also just tighten up our borders, redefine the rules of doing business in Africa, prioritize our own industries and our own brands, we'll be able to get a better leverage. Now, America itself in 1933 came up with the Buy American Act. And with that act, the America said at least 50% of all goods and services sold to American government, as well as as well as agencies of the American government, should all be made in America, American hands, American talent, American material. What has it done? That has strengthened America's economy and hand in the world, and enabled America to be able to have a leverage when they're having discussions. What have Africans done? We have opened up our borders. We've allowed anybody to do what they want. We have mortgaged all our resources to the rest of the world, and we and on the other end have decided that we will just be importing finished goods. That has weakened head. And I think we need to build great African brands.
But the African Free Trade Continental Agreement is so lacking in terms of its application, isn't it?
Well, I mean, it's what Professor Lumumba said, PLO Lumumba in Kenya said, which is interesting. He said, Africans never finish what they start. So this idea of free trade was started in 1963. It was one of the fundamental pillars of how we're going to build the economy of Africa post-independence. We've taken 60 years plus to enact, to finally ratify the AfCFTA. But now at least we have somebody like Wamkele Mene in Ghana who is responsible for ensuring that this goes through. I think right now it's in the process of being, if you will, activated, making sure that it happens. What we need to do as Africans, unfortunately, is we need to move with speed and haste, but we also need to move together, because we have the tendency of operating separate. If you look at EU last year, Macron went to the EU and he said to the EU, we need to think by European Act right now, because we need to strengthen our leverage against America, against China, against Russia. So we need to think like they do. By the way, I'm not saying that we should tell them to go to hell. I'm just saying that can we just equally play the game the way they play the game, and then we can compete as equals. So yes, I agree with you. We are too tardy. We are too slow to implement the AfCFTA. But I think in a beautiful way, President Donald Trump has given the continent a golden opportunity. He said to the continent, I don't want half of you coming to my country, and I don't want any of you moving to my... I'm not going to be feeding you guys. I'm not going to be powering you. It's a golden opportunity. It's an opportunity that was given to South Africa, the apartheid South Africa government, when it was declared a pariah state. Because at that time when it was declared pariah state, they had nowhere else to do. What did they do? They created the brands that have become the pillar of the industrialized South Africa. We need to use the same rules and learn from what apartheid South Africa did, learn from what Russia has done, and learn from what the very people we are contesting with, America and Europe and China, what they've done.
Well, I don't think we can really take this conversation further in terms of practical outcomes without mentioning the L word, which is leadership. And by leadership, I mean specifically political leadership rather than corporate leadership or commercial leadership. You see, the thing is, Africa has always had potential, and certainly since independence, So how do you get the leadership in the different countries to take this challenge seriously and not betray everyone as usual?
I think we are blaming the wrong people. So Ellen Sirleaf Johnson did say that the continent is not poorly led. So I agree with that. We're actually blaming the wrong people. We shouldn't be blaming politicians. We should be blaming the 1.3 billion Africans who every day go on some quasi-elections and they think that their votes are meaning anything and get people on power. And then those people don't do what they do. And as Africans, what do? We just go and say, oh, well, we'll just wait for the next election. Instead of saying, you're out of here, you are not delivering on the mandate. I mean, we're learning now in many other countries where leaders are being frog marched out of their positions. So Africans need to grow balls and start frog marching the people that we call leaders out of their position if they are not leading. Because part of leadership is having a clear vision, having the right people, not your cronies, and then ensuring that you are delivering on these visions. If you're not doing those three things, then we should kick them out. Look at this as a marriage, Donu. I don't think you will sit with your husband for till death do us part if he is being a disaster and is destroying the family, destroying your and all those things. That is what we're having. We are in an abusive relationship here in this continent, and the abuser is the leader. And us as the poor spouses, we are just sitting there and we are saying, at least I'm married. Instead of saying that, well, get out of here, let me divorce, to sit with an abuser.
Maybe looking at, maybe not a divorce, but an amicable separation. Can South Africa and the rest of Africa make up for the losses of US business and investment by doing a lot more with the BRICS countries, China, India, and of course the Gulf countries, which are now part of BRICS, and Russia? So what is that a real alternative? And maybe Brazil as well, big economy.
I do not think our relationship with America is going to end up in a divorce. I think our relationship with America, we're going to have an amicable solution to the problems. Remember how Donald Trump was. Donald Trump is a give or take, is the transactional president. It's what's in it for us and what's in it for you. So what South Africa should do, I think South Africa should continue to do the back channel approaches, but also in South Africa, we shouldn't be scoring own goals than putting the wrong people to go send the message. Because sometimes the messenger is the problem as well, like we have as we started this conversation. So I think we're going to resolve this, but I think it will be completely different to what it was in the past. But then it also means we need to also ensure that we are not overly reliant on one friend. It's what we call in business our concentration risk. So we cannot have all our eggs in one basket. And now you're beginning to see what's happening. You've got the BRICS, you've got the BRICS Plus, you've got the AfCFTA, you've got the regional economic, the REX regions. So we need to just ensure that all our eggs are spread across different places. But to me, the most important thing is we need to understand our value, we need to understand our leverage, and we need to take that to the marketplace. I don't think that having just relationship with BRICS and China and Russia is going to solve all our problems. because at the end of the day, Russia, China, America, they're all the same at the end of the day. All of them want what we have, and what we need to realize is what we have is valuable, and take our goods to the best offer.
Can we get back to that issue of brands? Because I know, Thebe, you've exhaustively gone through lists of the brands that are African and have some potential in terms of global appeal. Tell us about a couple of them and what they perhaps need to do in order to be able to compete internationally.
Let's look at the most profitable airline in the world, Ethiopian Airways. And it is the biggest airline in the world. One of the biggest airlines in the world is probably the top 3 or top 5. They've got over 150 fleet of the most modern fleet. What has that done? That's done a couple of things. One, it has raised the profile of Ethiopia as a country. Second, it is bringing foreign currency into Ethiopia, which Ethiopia needs to develop. And you are beginning to see the manifestations of that in Ethiopia itself, but also from a continent. They go to over 40 countries in the continent. So they are connecting the continent and enabling the continent to connect, if you will, and to move goods and services. You look at Dangote with their cement, their refineries, their flowers. So you're beginning to see that as a continent, we actually have the capability and have examples of brands like that, the MTNs, which are in more than 18 countries, enabling Africans to connect and to transact. You look at Safaricom's M-Pesa, which is the most innovative mobile money transfer solution in the world, which was copied around the world, coming out of Africa. So we've got great brands that will enable us to do a few things. What do brands do for us? One is a great brands help to create jobs, industries rather. So as a result of M-Pesa, if you will, Kenya went in 2006 from 10% access to financial services, 4 years later, 2010, to 70% access to financial services. So you can see how brands can also be transformative from an economy. So you look at all those brands and what they do, and you say, perhaps if we build great brands like M-Pesa, like MTN, like Dangote, like Ethiopian Airways, we will have the leverage we need to be able to trade and to in the rest of the world. I think we've got great brands. I think we have the capability to do that. We just need the confidence to believe in us, and that's our challenge.
I started off this conversation by suggesting that the end of aid doesn't necessarily mean the end for Africa, does it?
No. We have had over $50 trillion of aid in over 50 years coming into this continent. What has the aid done? The aid has created a lot of corruption in the one end, but the other end is that the trade has actually not been that benevolent. Now, if you look at, let's use the US as an example, and maybe it applies to all of them. So, and I was having a conversation with a former USAID staff member, and he says to me, "Do you think we are really that benevolent?" So, what do you mean? He says 65% of everything we give you goes right back to our country. I said, "You're kidding?" He says, "Let me explain to you. We're obligated to fly only American airline, eat by American, drive American, bring American talent, use American inputs." So aid is actually the most disastrous part of the continent because 65% goes back, and perhaps the rest of it goes into corruption, and very little trickles down to the development of the different countries. So if you have that understanding, you should actually be kissing aid goodbye and rather looking at the resources that you have, the brands that you have, the talent that you have, and says, shouldn't I use this rather as a fairer exchange instead of an open mouth and open hands as an exchange for money which comes in? Just think about it. You're sitting there with an open mouth, somebody dangles a piece of meat and pulls it out again. And then you're just sitting there and thinking, at least I tasted the smell of the meat, but you don't have the nutrients that flows from that meat.
Thebe, on that issue of the small amount of aid given set against the overall GDP numbers, your president, Thabo Mbeki, worked on this project to identify the illicit financial outflows from Africa. He put it 12 years ago at over 100 billion a year. A lot of bankers say it's probably well over double since then. the amount of gold, for example, that is going out without paying any tariffs or royalties to United Arab Emirates at the moment, given the high price of gold. What can be done? Not very little, it seems to have been done practically to follow up Mbeki's recommendations. And what would it take to run a marketing campaign to sensitize people to this stuff? Probably a couple of $100 billion is flowing out of Africa to no benefit to the people of the continent every year, going into Grand Cayman, you name it, tax havens. How do you think that could be addressed?
So, I mean, we've got maybe 2 or 3 categories of leaders in Africa, right? We've got the benevolent political leaders, then we've got the corporate leaders, then we've got the thieves. And the thieves come across from all of them. Some of them come in beautiful capes during the day trying to save the rest of the world. And some of them are dressed in corporate leadership suits, and some of them are dressed as politicians. And that's what President Mbeki was talking about, that the people who funnel the money out of the continent, because as a continent, we are not just porous from borders, but we also, our borders are not just porous from physical moves of people, but porous as well in terms of the flows of currencies. And who enables it? Who enables that? The very Western countries which are calling Africa names. So I was telling my good friends in Switzerland, I said, you made your reputation and your name from harboring illicit funds which have impoverished the rest of the continent. But it's not just Switzerland. But England is the same one, because England will allow people with illicit funds to go build mansions in Chelsea and all those, and then they'll do the same everywhere, and we've seen it every day. So I think it's a good project that President Mbeki is going on. But the second thing is that I think also as Africans we need to learn from each other. Let's say South Africa for a long time had a very strong reputation for very strong fiscal borders, in terms of you couldn't just move money in and out of this country, and that's why people can't stand it when they come here, because you don't find people on the streets here selling dollars for rents. You're not going to find it here. You're not going to be able to just send somebody $1,000 without going through some paperwork. So, but then as a continent, we need to be learning from each other. So the stricter we are, that's one side. But we cannot fight from just one side. You also fight it from the other side, from the recipient of the funds. Whether it's called Cayman Islands, whether it's called Switzerland, whether it's called Dubai, you have to fight the battle from that other end as well. So we always just look on the legs on the one side, coming out of Africa. But where is it going into? It's going into the very people who walk around highfalutin, standing on podiums, teaching us about governance and all those. They are the very people who are actually the biggest culprits when it comes to breaking governance.
You seem quite optimistic, Thebe, about the future for Africa without aid, without this industry of aid. But it sounds very much as though it's a process and it's going to take some time. And that means in this intervening period, the continent and its people are in for a really bumpy time.
They asked Donald Trump last week. They said, Donald Trump, with this tariff agenda that you're on, the tariff agenda, you are going to cause prices to go up. You are going to disrupt lives and all those. And he said, it's going to be a bumpy ride, but ultimately it's going to be a smooth ride. That's how the continent should look at it. The continent should say, the only difference is we really must mean it, and it must be intentional, and it must be activated. The problem now is we have yet to see a leadership that rises to the occasion, that says, I am taking this on, except for some in the Sahel region. So if you look at General Traore, for example, when he dispossessed our beloved French of their project called Burkina Faso, and decided that you cannot, and he decided such silly things as saying you cannot have your money put in reserve in a foreign bank and ask for 15% stipend or spending money every once in a while, and we give it to you if you want. In that instance, you're beginning to see that there is a type of leader that is emerging. Whether you like him or not, whether he's the right one at this time, time will tell. But at least there are signs that shows that there are some young African leaders who understand that they can play a better role in transforming this continent. You go to Senegal, it's the same.
Thebe Ikalafeng, can I thank you very much indeed? That was a very interesting romp around the continent. That's it for this edition of Africa Here and Now. Please remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel and share with your friends. We're on the major audio platforms too. You can follow us on the socials, Insta, X, Threads, Facebook, TikTok, you name it. Don't forget our website where you can find all past episodes of the show. Plus, there are some really interesting blogs from some special guests. AfricaHere&NOW.com is where you can find all that. My email is martine@AfricaHere&NOW.com. Get in touch. We recorded this episode on Monday, the 17th of March, 2025. And Busby is our producer. Our original music is by Enric Adam. Simon Elliott put it all together. Our thanks to our guest, Thebe Ikalafeng. And from Donu, Patrick and me, thank you as ever for your company.